I'm here with James Gibson, and it's a pleasure to have him. He's a world champion breaststroke swimmer. He competed in the Athens Olympics. He's also a member of the Royal Highness's Special Order of the British Empire. He received one of the highest honors, from the Queen of England for his contribution to sport. Currently, he's the head coach of the Energy Standard team, which competes in the International Swim League, which is based in Turkey, where he's coaching now. Thanks for taking the time, James, to speak with me.
Hey, Leslie. Thanks for having me. And apologies for the Peaky Blinders hat. I've got a bit of quarantine hair going on. So everything's a bit crazy at the minute.
I love the hat. I think it looks great. Gives you an air of sophistication. Maybe you can talk a little bit more about your background in swimming. Certainly you're highly accomplished, as I alluded to, but maybe you can talk about some of your personal, bests or things that stand out for you, and a little bit about your role right now as a coach.
Okay, so I'll just briefly go on my athletic career, because I've kind of had that lovely career transition 11 years ago, and I'm a bit more successful as a coach now, so I'm quite happy to expand on that. So as an athlete, I competed for Great Britain for 12 years. I was a professional swimmer. Olympic professional sport is a little bit different to American football and basketball, in that we can have quite extended careers, but swimming was quite a brutal sport, and it took some wear and tear on my body. And I eventually retired from swimming in 2009 due to a back injury. But in that time, I was a world champion swimmer, a European champion, a Commonwealth champion. In fact, I won every event except for the Olympic Games. I had some quite bad memories of the Olympics. It's kind of everyone gets these tattoos, but that just reminds me of the worst day of my life. So I never got one of them. But I did have a transition into coaching. I transitioned in 2009, and my goal for myself as a swimmer was always to swim in the London Olympics and say goodbye to the sport I love, but that was taken from me. But what I did was I thought I could actually help someone else achieve their goals and their dreams by racing in those Olympics, and then I was going to sign off the sport and try and find another career. But in that point, I fell in love with coaching. From 2009 to 2012, I worked. I started off as an assistant coach, but then I got my own group. I was based in Marseille in the south of France. And one of the guys, I coached this young sprinter, who was a bit rough around the edges. But this guy went on to win the London Olympics, and he won the blue ribbon event, the men's 50 freestyle. Wow. So I had a quite accelerated development in coaching. In a very short period of time, I'd coached an Olympic champion, a world champion. And that was a little bit too quick looking back on things, because in coaching is one of these things, and I guess in all sports science and everything, you can get a little bit in front of yourself. You think you know everything. You think you know how to do things, and that your ways are better than everyone else's. And then as you get on, you suddenly realize that you don't actually know a lot. And a lot of that is to do with the athlete's talent. That's why they were so successful. But then over my last 10 years, 11 years now, I've been coaching. I've worked at the British National High Performance Centre. I was a head coach there. We had our most successful ever Olympics in 2016. And then after 2016, I took a job with a private company called Energy Standard. I was tasked with setting up the best swimming club in the world to compete in a new professional league called the International Swimming League. And I achieved that within 3 years. I had to involve some recruiting. I currently work with a lot of the best athletes in the world, 5 different Olympic champions, all of which have really bought into this idea of changing swimming for the better, because we realize that Olympic sports are finding it very hard at the minute to compete with the new generation, esports, e-gaming. It's exciting, it's fast, it's high octane. And also we're very aware of the new generation of today are technologically driven. Life is going now with the smartphone. And we can all say it's wrong. We should be enjoying the moment. Instead of filming everything, but the sports that actually get this first, and they can understand that this is the next generation, avatars, digital, how to amalgamate technology with elite sport. They're the ones that are going to get the leap. And Olympic sport is not there. Yeah. So we work in an organisation called the International Swimming League. It's very, very different to what we consider traditional swimming, because it's fast pace, it's continual racing, it's stressful, team strategy, more kind of a chess game than what we consider normal swimming. But that's the goal for the future. That's what I'm involved in. And thanks for having me on. And hopefully I can give a little bit of insight from my experience of coaching from the last 11 years into the projects of what you guys are participating in.
Yeah. Well, and obviously you've had a lot of success as a coach. What do you attribute that success to?
I'd say one of my key philosophies on coaching is work with the human being. Don't work with the physiology necessarily to start with. So what I tend to do is I really get to know my athletes, really get to know them, because especially in my project now, in my group, I think it's like 15 different nationalities. And you know what, all the athletes, they look at the world differently. They grow up in a different environment. They have different parents. They have different values. So, you know, their way of dealing with pressure and the way that they deal with the world is very different. So I actually think that the coaches of the future, the dinosaur coaches, in terms of you come into my program shouting, screaming, hard ways of working, that's done. Because now it's about, we have to meet the athletes halfway. Also with, you know, I think there's been a lot of issues with bullying put upon coaches in the past, but now it's a new way is developing. It's more, coaches have to bend their philosophies and they have to really find out about their athletes and what's important. And, you know, this old shouting, screaming style is now finished, and it's more the negotiation with the athletes, and figuring out how to get good together. And that's kind of how I work.
Yeah. So when you say kind of meet the athlete halfway, is that what you're referring to, that you work in partnership with them to try and achieve mutual goals?
Absolutely. And we're very fortunate that the athletes that we work with, they've kind of come through the whole learning phase. So they're already developed and they're already quite sure of themselves and their personalities. So we're not essentially, because we're professional, we're not teaching anymore. We're more managing. And what that comes down to is, you work with the athlete and you give them, you hold them accountable as well. So you involve them in the discussion. So all my high-level athletes, my Olympic champions, we talk about the program together. Like, what do we want to achieve? And you're the athlete, you're important, you know, and what do you feel is important for your progress? And I think that's something that's been ignored in the past. It's more the coach stands and dictates what they want. And gets angry if the athlete doesn't want to do it. So we have guys that, you know, sprinters that they honestly believe that they don't need to do any swimming, and then they'll go fast. And, you know, if we give them more swimming, they're not going to believe in the program. So what we tend to do is, like we say, it's all about discussion, clear communication. Like I put across my feelings about what I feel that the athlete needs, and I actually invite them to do the same. And then we meet halfway on a lot of things, and also with the full understanding that we do have to actually do what it takes to win. If we can't, you know, at some point there is we always have to bring back to the expectation is that we do win. We compete for gold medals. I have very high expectations on staff and on athletes, because that's where I believe high performance takes place. But we have to make sure we do what is required, and that does need to be talked about very, very regularly.
Right. So there's kind of clear communication of those expectations and those standards, but there's also discussion and involvement with the athlete, kind of getting their perspective or their interests. Sounds like that's front and center in your approach.
100%. I'd say it's athlete focused, coach driven. If I had to phrase it, and coach facilitated, athlete driven, same sort of thing.
You mentioned technology, and it sounds also like there's sort of a novel format to the swimming events in the International Swimming League that's different than traditional formats. You also talked a little bit about, or alluded to, the idea of technology. And just briefly, I was curious how technology may inform, or does it inform, your training practices and habits, or what influence does technology have on your swimming preparation, training?
So for me personally, I believe most sport is an art. Okay, so it's about technique and it's how you move. And with running, swimming, it's all about how it, how the body, the biomechanics, how the body moves. So I use technology mainly for the video analysis. Like I'm talking to you on an iPad now. This is my biggest tool and my best tool. So I'm constantly filming the athletes, giving them visual feedback, whether it's something, not just the iPad, the phone, using biomechanical analysis, because efficiency will always win over raw power. Always. Let's just, you don't see a runner on the Olympic podium with bad technique. You don't see a swimmer on the Olympic podium that doesn't glide through the water and make it look effortless. So at first I put it's the art form, and I use technology, the video analysis. We've got a video analysis biomech guy that comes in regularly, and it's repetition of excellence. It's going over and over the basics, always bringing the athlete back to efficiency rather than power. That's my first thing. But then technology also plays a role in the physiological side. So once the art is in place, you add the science to it. So we use the heart rate monitors that just sit on the side of the goggles. You can get consistent live feedback. Obviously lactate testing, which I'm more lactate, to be honest, than heart rate. The heart rate, I find each individual athlete can vary dramatically. So if we just set these standard aerobic zones, you get some guy barely moving, but he's working very, very hard.
Yeah.
And so I prefer to use lactates as a measure of physiology, or my physiological measure, with regular testing on the guys. But say technology in the future, I think it's going to look very different. And I'm quite scared about the advances. We're going to have 3D avatars, and we're going to have, actually going to have sim racing going on. Is Chad Leclos or Caleb Dressel actually going to have their own avatar racing in the computer world? It won't even be them. Stars. So, and this whole quarantine, we've seen a real strong emergence of esports, and they've done very, very well. I think it's Formula One and IndyCar racing. They've almost got similar amount of viewers and the real thing. Yeah. So the whole world in the next 10 years is going to become a very, very different place. And the sports that can get in front, I talk a lot about coaching the future. So what I'm looking at is, what does the future look like in our athletic performance? It's the same with the sport. What does the future look like? And the teams and the sports that get there first will definitely get the publicity.
Yeah. You mentioned, James, in 2009, you had a severe back injury, and it sounds like that precluded you from going to the 2010 Olympics. Is that correct?
2012 Olympics. So,
sorry, 2012, pardon me. Maybe you can talk a little bit about that experience, what happened with your back? Yeah.
So it was quite a strange one, actually. I'll be blatantly honest. So I did a normal gym session, crazy gym session. Woke up the next morning and I could barely move my right leg. So I was thinking I had a bad leg. I wasn't thinking I had a bad back, but it was actually quite serious at the time. And obviously you think, I can't put my socks on, I can't do anything. Went straight to hospital. The doctor took one look at me, was in immediately for an MRI scan. I was in the south of France, and had a huge prolapse disc hernia in my L4, L5. So what that had done, the disc hernia, is essentially the disc had just popped. It's kind of a jelly, obviously you know this one, just explain, jelly fluid came out, crushed my sciatic nerve, and rendered my right leg pretty much paralyzed. It was quite severe. I had severe foot drop. I couldn't even stand on tiptoes. And then I was pretty much in for emergency surgery pretty much the next day. And I had a spinal discectomy, had half of my disc taken out. But you know what? When it was done, it was kind of strange. When I woke up after the surgery, I knew, I just had this feeling that it was done. Immediately I had full function. I had no pain post-operation. I could bend down, touch my toes, because the doctor explained that just the disc had been removed from the nerve, so the nerve was working, but it wasn't right, And even today, I still get some nerve sensation, and I don't really want to push myself anymore. And at that point, I was 30 or 29, 30 years old, and there was more other things in my life that were important, like playing with my son. And I
Yeah.
could have gone back. I tried to get back into sport. Honestly, I did, but the back of my brain didn't really let it go. And I was part of the old generation of sportsmen, where it was get injured, go and lay on the physio bed, get fixed, get injured, rely on someone else. We did no injury prevention work. We did no pre-pool work, pre-gym work. We did nothing, but we didn't know either. That was our time.
Yeah.
So I was the last of that dinosaur generation. So now with my guys, they're Pilates, yoga, pre-pool. We don't do any crazy circuit training anymore. You watch the people do crazy circuits, you just look at them, they're just destroying their bodies. They can't hold their technique, they can't hold anything. So now our sport has shifted more to functional movement, injury prevention, and it keeps the athletes going for a lot longer.
Yeah. You mentioned you did a normal session and a quote unquote crazy session. So it sounds like a normal session involved high volume or high intensity training load.
Mm-hmm.
Is that correct?
High load, high gym, like a lot of gym work. It was squats. I remember doing squats and deadlifts. It was into swimming, and that was it. I didn't feel anything go at the time. I didn't feel, at the time, didn't feel bad. I just went home, ate dinner, went to bed, and woke up the next morning. And it was a bit of a interesting experience.
Yeah.
But what came with my injury was, I guess I had, I definitely got into the depression cycle post-injury, where it's more the fact that when you're an elite athlete, you have sponsors, you have funding from your federation, you have money. So there's no real drive, I say drive. And I knew I was on the way out. I had 2 years of security. But then you get into this cycle where you do your rehab half an hour a day. You're not interacting with your teammates anymore like you used to. So you've got less social interaction. You start going to bed because you're watching series. You get into the cycle going to bed 1, 2, 3 in the morning. And then you start waking up later and later. So your daylight is getting less and less. But once you're in that cycle, and you see it I see it with a lot of athletes, you can't break out. And it gets later. And so, yeah. And you actually become more of a social recluse because there's not a lot you can do. But I got working with some good sports psychologists when I realised that I was going nowhere. I started working with some good sports psychologists. One guy called Steve Peters in the UK. He's got a very good reputation. He's written some good books, and they kind of helped me just see my ways and get me back on track.
Yeah. So I was going to say or ask, I imagine it must have been a lot to process to kind of go from having a normal training session, a vigorous one, going to bed feeling okay, and then waking up and realizing something was not right. And it sounds like in a very short period of time, you then had to have this surgery that, from the sounds of it, then changed the rest of your life.
Yeah. Yes. So now, say 11 years on, it was the best thing that ever happened to me because I have a very successful career. I work with the best athletes in the world, and I couldn't have imagined a better outcome. But I say if I'd have carried on and had gone to London, I would never have won a medal in London. I would have failed in London. I might not even made the Olympics in London. And then I would have finished my career being quite, excuse the language, but a bit pissed off, really. And you see in a lot of elite athletes, they achieve greatness, but yet they leave the sport with such hatred for it. And it happens so regularly. And I try my best in my coaching that's why, like I said, I involve the athlete in decision making, where they feel. Then the biggest thing the athletes think when they finish their careers are, the coach never listened to me. I wanted to do this. The coach was an idiot. And it is, that's the reality. Yeah. So, but I got to finish. It wasn't my choice. I was gutted. I was gutted that I wasn't going to swim at the London Olympics. I was devastated that I wasn't going to have that opportunity and say goodbye to the fans in Britain at 20,000 people. But then I shifted my mindset. Yes, I went into a hole. I did go into a hole. I don't disagree with that. It was a dark hole. But I think from being an athlete, once you can figure out trying to get back on track, you just throw yourself into something else.
Yeah.
So the idea, an athlete's life is, I just do everything for that moment. That's it. Nothing else matters. So then I threw myself into coaching. I'm going to help someone else go to London. I'm going to help these kids that I'm working with now, not kids, wrong word. I'm going to help these adults that I'm working with now go to London. And then when Florent won the Olympics in London, it was like he somehow completed my journey. So although I didn't go, I got my Olympic gold medal, but I know someone else won it.
Yeah,
but
yeah, vicariously.
I got my Olympic gold medal, and it was like, that was everything to me. Yeah. And I kind of, even to this day, I've got a little bounce, because it's a relaxation. You've got the bricks off your shoulder. I'm not continually chasing that dream. And I think I actually coach a lot better for it, because now it's just working with great athletes. I've had so many lessons from my own career that I can sort of, all the things that I think that went wrong in my own career, I then can help out in my new career, which is coaching.
Yeah. So would you say that, you said you were kind of in a dark place for a while, and would you say that kind of what helped you get out of that was having something else to focus on, or you mentioned to kind of throw yourself into?
Yeah, absolutely. But I had good people around me, and at the first instance, yeah, you push people away. But the head coach there at the time in Marseille, where I was training, he actually said to me, the conversation was like, "You're a waste of space. You either go home and make other people miserable, or you come and help me out." And he left me no choice. So that, again, as an athlete, you're kind of used to that when there's no choice. Like, you got to do something. All right, well, if I don't do this, and then I'm going to have to go find something else out. Yeah. So I went to help him, and then, as I say, after the first year, I then got my own group. I was working as an assistant, and I had my own group, and the rest kind of went from there. Yeah, and it was a very difficult point in my life, right? Because it's such a wash of emotions, and you're young, like you're under 30 years old. You think you know it all, but you don't. You're still a young adult, and as an athlete, you're protected from the real world as well. So the real world is brutal. Job interviews, you just don't get the job if you're not good enough. You don't have someone try and find fancy words to make you feel better. You don't. But so it was a tough transition for me. But like I said, it's really helped me as a coach, because and then if I have injured athletes, we get injured athletes all the time. We get a lot of injuries. But now I'm like, well, why is this happening? And there's some people just get older, and it's difficult as they get older. But now, like I said, all the mistakes I made in my career, which led to my back injury, now I am relentless with injury prevention work. My athletes hate me, but I don't let go. And I can show them a lovely scar in the middle of my spine, And it's very powerful as a coach. You can say to an athlete, "This is what happened to me because I did not do this." Yeah. Okay. And this is my non-negotiable. So if you want to swim in my program, you will do this, because I don't want you to be paralyzed in your right leg one day. Right. And it's a very easy way to convince people to do things.
Yeah. So again, that personal experience, it sounds like it informs your coaching practices, particularly with regard to injury prevention steps.
Oh, absolutely. And also injury management, because I know, and I've been there, and if I get athletes in the same position, I can help. Yeah.
So you, in talking about some of your personal experience, James, you alluded to one of the things I wanted to ask about, which is, what are some of the challenges that an injured athlete experiences once they do get hurt?
Well, honestly, it's all psychological. My thing with injuries is the psychological impact is normally worse than the injury. And it's this feeling that you're getting left behind. And there's a stress that they get left behind. And then they've got this stress of catch up. So similar to this quarantine period now, my athletes are not physically exhausted, but they're mentally exhausted. And it's very different for everyone. So someone's got full access to facilities, someone hasn't. The people that don't are feeling like are worried that I'm being left. But the human body doesn't work like that. So when you have an injury, So it's more the psychological stress that actually kills the athlete. I had, in 2011, I had one of the best 100 freestyle swimmers in the world. He won a world medal in 2011. So second best swimmer in the world on 100 freestyle. He got injured in November. I had a shoulder injury, but he had to have a small surgery on it. But then it was like the antibiotics, the slow build, the 6 weeks, and the full rehab program. But he'd already convinced himself he was too far behind everyone, and he didn't even make the Olympic team. So you got to go, and it was more like that. The body's all right. The body's fine. You can train the body to get better over a 10-week period. So it's more the dealing with, like, the athlete is trying to keep people relaxed, trying to understand that it's got to be a steady build-up. We have a lot of instances where people get re-injured themselves because they get to that point. I feel good to go. They go, bang.
Yeah.
Back
So
3 weeks.
they're using kind of how they feel as a guide to what they should be doing rather than, maybe meeting certain criteria or, being actually physically prepared, regardless of their feeling about it. Is that right?
Yeah. And I look, it's like, you look at sports like soccer, American football, they get injured all the time.
Right.
And the players don't really, obviously it's difficult for them. They're not too worried because they've got this such supreme confidence in themselves. And when they're fit, they know that, like, that Tom Brady, he's going straight back in at quarterback. As soon as he's fit enough, he's going to play. Doesn't matter, if he's got a shoulder niggle, he'll have a game off, but the other guy's not going to get a look in. It's the same with all that, like Neymar and Lionel Messi in soccer. Lionel Messi injures his ankle, takes 2 or 3 weeks off. As soon as he's half fit, he's playing in front of before the next guy. Yeah. But in swimming, because we have such a high volume in the water, there's always been this theory that more is better in swimming. Yeah. Like, the more you swim, the better you're going to be. But we know that just doesn't work anymore. Right. So the new generation will kind of understand that. You've got to swim smart, but still there's programs good programs for good athletes that just, the idea is let's kill the swimmer, and if they survive, great. If they don't, there'll be more. Right.
So it's sort of the survival of the fittest, and kind of for some programs it's still the overtrain, like a high volume of training equals better performance is the mindset. And if you don't survive absolutely. That system, we'll find someone who can. Mm-hmm. Yeah. So in terms of, you certainly indicate that injury is very much a psychological experience in addition to the physical, and maybe even the psychological aspects may be predominant. What are some uncertainties that the athlete may experience? And feel free to refer to your own injury experience or that of athletes you've coached.
Uncertainties. The biggest fear is not being selected for the team. Also, you got to imagine, if you're going to talk about the Olympics, not just the ISL. So there's a fear. So in terms of my team, there's a fear of not being selected, and if you're not being selected, you won't have your contract renewed for the following season. The fear of the Olympics is even worse because the Olympics happens once every 4 years. So if you get injured in the Olympic season, that's it. That's a hard one psychologically to deal with because I've trained for 3 years. I'm going to miss this one, and if I want to go for the next one, I've got to train for another 4 years. Yeah. So you could have a niggle. If you get injured of May 2021, you've pretty much missed your chance. And that's the double whammy psychology. And you're like, because there's this, in swimming, there's this theory that everything has to be perfect for you to swim fast. It's rubbish. It's rubbish. I don't think I've ever had a perfect training cycle with any, where you write your plans at the start, is you make it look lovely and draw it, and these lovely curves going up with peak performance. In reality, it's just up, down, left, right, here, there. So there's this theory that you need a perfect preparation to swim fast. But the reality, everyone ignores the reality. It's total rubbish. It's total rubbish.
Do athletes internalize that though? And I wonder if they do, does that impact them in instances like injury all the more? Whereas, if it sounds like your approach or mindset in the world of swimming may be somewhat unconventional.
Mm. No, yeah, they internalize. This is the thing with injury. So a lot of them don't tell you to start with. So if you've got shoulder niggles, they hold it until the moment it's too late. And like I said, and the reason is they feel that because swimming has been traditionally a more sport. They hide the injury until basically it goes pop, because they just carry on and on and on and on and on. But what I try and do with my guys is to make them not hold it internally. So we even talk like every morning. Please tell me everything, and because a lot of them are good, and over time you realize as a coach, the good ones are good, and they're good because they're good. You help them, but that's all you do.
Yeah.
You help them,
Right.
And I think you have to be exposed to a certain amount of great athletes to realize that.
Yeah. So almost like they're good, like you help them, but I wouldn't say they're going to be good irrespective of the coach, not at all, but they already certainly have physical capabilities that enable them to become an Olympic champion.
Yeah, exactly. So they've got the capabilities. So what you develop this trust with them, and honestly, from my own experience, it's like, guys, if you tell me in the morning, and also you get conflicts. So say if you've got an athlete with a bad shoulder and they're trying to do the set, as a coach, you don't know. If they don't tell you, you don't know. So as a coach, you're looking at them thinking, why is Sally or whoever, why are they being a pain in the backside today? They're not trying, or they're behind everyone. And the swimmer's looking at you going, my shoulder hurts, he's making me do this stupid stuff. Why is he making me do this? So that's how conflict happens. And then that makes the whole situation so much worse. Yeah. Because then the athlete views the coach as not being supportive, the coach is getting on, but the coach doesn't know. Yeah. So what I try and do is encourage this open environment of trust. It's like, guys, if you do have a problem, you tell me. And I honestly, with injuries, I guess get them out now of the pool. Like someone says, oh, my foot, it can't carry on. Get out or stop before it gets too bad. Right. Because always prevention is better than the cure.
Yeah. Yeah. So rather than sort of adopting the mindset of, oh, well, I guess there are high level athletes you're working with already, and probably most of them, I imagine, want to train and be fit. So it's not like you're thinking they're using injuries as an excuse to get out of training, or, it sounds like you want them to just stop what they're doing if they are feeling some injury or signs of injury.
Yeah, absolutely. And that, I think that comes from the coach to set the environment for that. Like I don't believe in ego coaching or ego training. We don't do that. We have 14 athletes full time in the program, and it's not gun ho, rah rah, team charts, organized fun, team building, all that stuff. It's performance planning. It's what does it take to win the Olympic gold medal. It's looking at the details behind it, because we're not like the USA. Europe's not like the USA. USA has an abundance of talent, and the college program, NCAA, is just magnificent to develop talent because it keeps the numbers going. Like most colleges in the USA have like 60, 70 swimmers on a team, and that's every year. It's just a continual conveyor belt. And, if a few drop off, they're not too concerned because, they're going to get a fresh load of talent. Europe, we don't have that. We just don't have that in our sports. Yeah. So when we find a talent, you have to nurture it and you have to look after it. And that ego coaching and ego training just doesn't work. And also it encourages injury as well.
What do you mean by ego coaching or ego training?
Ego training, head-to-head, continuously head-to-head. Guys, racing this, racing that. You're the winner. And you see that in some programs, and it works. For young kids, they love it. They just love it. But for professional elite, if every training session is a competition, they just burn out. Yeah. And also, for injury-wise, if you're constantly pitching the athletes against each other in training, if one has a bad shoulder, they just carry on. You know, because you've got the teammates getting stuck into them. Like, oh, yeah, why don't you try? Come on, last again or whatever. That's ego training. If you, I call it the banter generation.
Yeah.
And if you're continuously doing that, you push your body beyond, and then you can have more problems of injury.
Right. So if you're creating an environment where the athletes are constantly comparing themselves to one another, or to these normative standards, or to trying to outbest one another, that you're suggesting that may lend itself to things like overtraining or injury?
100%. Especially in the gym. Especially you get a group of boys in the gym together. Like my two best boys, I've got currently in my program the second and third fastest men ever in swimming over one length. And we're at to a point where we tend not to let them lift together, because they're more busy looking at each other, than the technique goes. Then you're just trying to do everything you can to outbench the other guy, and then every session you try and do max lifting, which we all know, if you're a weightlifting coach, that it doesn't work. If you're pushing yourself to the max every gym session or dry, what do you call it in the US, weight training? You call it weight training in the US?
Strength training?
Strength training, yeah. Strength. If you go in max lifts every time you go and do strength training, you just destroy your body. And then you got higher risk of injury. Right. So again, it's smart. That's ego. That's if you're constantly pitting the guys, it's actually a lot of the insecurity of the coach as well, because it's much easier to be an ego-based coach than what it is to be a methodical-based coach. Because you get a group of men, you put them all together, they're going to go at each other. They are.
Yeah. So when you say a methodical-based coach, again, that's sort of referring to creating an environment where you're focused on mastery of technique. Like earlier you mentioned, efficiency is of primary concern. So that's the focus, I'm guessing, is maximizing efficiency in your own personal technique?
Yeah, I'd say mastery of technique, but also you got to provide a learning environment for the stimulating, but in terms of learning, rather than this constant head-to-head based work. So the way we work with it, we've got staff of 5 people. It's always about challenging the athletes, but doing it in an education-based way as well. So provide the learning environment and also involve them in those decision-making as well.
Right. So you mentioned education, James. I'm wondering, what's the relevance or importance of education in terms of injury once the athlete does get hurt?
It's massive. So normally a simple basic protocol is if an athlete has picked up an injury, it depends on how serious it is, but the first protocol is always a psychologist, just to drop a line, keep talk, and it's not to say the sports psychology. Last 10 years I've always had a sports psychologist by my side, and it's more to give the athlete an open space to talk. So we actually already all on the same page, because you can think it's fine. Oh, she's fine, he's fine, but really the devil is brewing. The psychologist calls it bottle bang. So you imagine a Coke bottle. You just keep shaking the Coke bottle, keep shaking it. Eventually, it just explodes, and that's why you get the tears sometimes, the shouting and screaming. You don't listen to me, but it just comes from lack of communication. So the education around injuries, talk, force them to talk. If they don't want to talk to you, take them for a coffee, get them to talk, and find out where they really sit with this injury. Because also I've learned as well not to fill the space. So as a coach, you always want to say, don't be so silly. You're going to be fine. You're going to be that. Just listen. Just listen to what the athlete has to say. And most coaches speak way too much, and probably me now, I'm talking
That's great.
lot. But coaches talk too much, and they don't listen to what the athlete is saying. Yeah. And I think that with the injury, if you're not listening to your athlete, or you're just fluffing it over to what they're really thinking, you're going to have some conflict later on. But you also need to present, in the education phase, you need the physiotherapist to present the return to training, or a professional. And that can't be, the coach has to be involved, but there has to be someone who's got credibility.
Yeah.
I'm a coach. I'm not a doctor. I'm not a physio. So I know a lot of coaches out there think they can do everything, but you're not. You have to then, you hand over responsibility to a trusted member of staff, and you're involved in the communication process, and you're always sat there with the athlete, but you've got to let a professional dictate the rehabilitation. And it has to be visual. It has to be seen like, this is what we're going to do this week. These are our objectives. This is what we're going to, and it has to be like a methodical build. And like I say, most athletes will just, lay on the physio bed, try to be fixed. And then as soon as they feel half decent, they'll go 150%. And then the risk of re-injury is just ridiculously big.
Right. So you mentioned earlier, when you were an athlete and kind of the mindset when someone got hurt or when you were injured was you go to the physio and it's like, okay, fix me. I'm here to get better. And I'm wondering if your suggestion or, kind of you're implying that that's less than helpful. And the athlete really needs to take ownership or be an active participant in their recovery to make it effective.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Yeah. It has to be athlete driven. If it's not athlete driven, it never gets. You never solve the issue 100%. But then it also depends on who the athlete is. Like we get a lot of people come through that, as a junior they've been pampered, and they've had like trainers and physios pampered to the every a small shoulder, and they'll go see the physio. So they actually believe that they need to get a massage every day and things like that. But that's not helpful either. When you get to the Olympics, you can't have a massage every day. If you go to the ISL and you're in a team of 32 and you've got 2 physios, you might not get a massage. So you've got to self-manage. But fortunately today, there's all these gimmicks. Like we just started using these Theraguns or massage guns. Fabulous. I bought one for myself. So in the morning I got bad back, I can loosen my back out, and it's genius. But and it also, so we have to educate the athletes on self-management. That's the job of the physio and the strength coach. So every day we do 30 minutes of work before they even get in the pool. So it's almost every day there's an hour. Replaced all sort of the non-functional, non-specific training, which would be circuits, let's say high anaerobic work for no real result, except for injury risk. We've replaced that with Pilates. So reformer work, functional movement, and the injury rate is just, it definitely, I started really with that in 2015, that style of coaching, and I'm going to touch some wood behind it.
It's working.
It is working, but then there's certain athletes that are just fragile. You do have athletes that they will be fragile, and also the education with the staff around is just accept it. If you get 2 weeks without a niggle, we open the champagne, but that's just who that athlete is. So it's always on the side of caution, and that takes some education to the athlete as well, because why are you always holding me back? Why are you always holding me back? Well, we can let you go, but this is my concerns, and this is what history tells us. And then you present, when your training load gets to this level, generally what happens, you pick up a niggle. So this is why we want to keep you here, because it's better to keep you here and grow you steadily over 20 weeks, 30 weeks, than try and get a short-term result in 4 or 5.
Right. So again, kind of continually providing communication, feedback, rationales as to and justifications. Here's why we're doing this with your training or your rehab program. We don't want you to get too far ahead so that you incur further injury. Or it sounds like that's kind of an ongoing process. Would that be accurate?
Yeah, absolutely. And honestly, the hardest thing about being an injured athlete is that social dynamic, because you're out of the group. And once you're out of the group, so the group moves, it's like a train that's moving and you're stood on the platform, and you can feel it going away. And then if you're not going through the hard sessions when everyone else is, or you're in the rehab room when everyone else is working hard, that's the hardest thing. And you know what? Unfortunately, in my experience, the better swimmers get better treated during rehab, just because that they're the better athletes. They get more attention, and they know, that the physio staff and the coaches and everyone are putting pressure, because that guy can win the Olympics, and they're going to get back quicker. If you're, I'd say, the hardest thing is if you're, I'd say, a regular swimmer, still a great swimmer, still be a great swimmer, but if you're not one of the best for whatever reason, it's the same in every country at every level. Just even soccer, or if LeBron James gets injured, Lakers are going to give everything to get that guy back on. But if you're just a replacement for the Lakers, you're just going to get carried. How's he doing? Doing all right? Okay, great. How's LeBron? How's LeBron getting?
Yeah.
But that's the nature of sport.
Yeah. But so, I guess from the athlete standpoint, what if, I guess, regardless of whether you are the all-star or, the LeBron James or the Olympic champion hopeful, or someone who maybe of slightly lesser ability, how do they manage that feeling of isolation? Or, I love your analogy of standing on the train platform. It's the train's going by while you're still on it. From the athlete standpoint, how do they manage that isolation or that feeling that they're no longer the athlete or part of the team? What can they do?
The biggest issue, I think, with young athletes that are successful is that their identity is directly related to their athletic performance. So as soon as they can't compete well, they have low self-worth. And I've seen it in so many options. Like I said, I work with a psychologist, and the psychologist's job is, you've got to find out who that person really is. It doesn't matter. So even if swimming is not part of their life, it doesn't matter, because they're still it's Ben the person, or Florent the person, or Chad the person. That's the most important thing. And this is the issue with a lot of the young guys when they get injured, because they haven't figured that out, who they really are and what their values are. So their identity is, I feel self-worth while I'm winning. When I don't feel self-worth, I feel useless. So that's why injury is so dangerous for a young athlete, because then suddenly, if they're a serial winner, they can't win. Then suddenly they feel like they have no value. And then they're outside the group, so they're not interacting with the group. So therefore their social skills are decreasing. And that's why you can see that it's the whirlwind. It can happen very quickly, especially with young guys.
Yeah.
So because it's like a first injury, this is a crisis. You've got the parents calling, "Oh, what's happened? You're going to be fine." And it's a big, huge fuss because they don't really understand what's happening to them either. And they're the ones that you just got to watch. And that's why I say it comes back to having the psychologist there, creating that environment, always talking. Psychologist gives the head coach a heads up. You need to watch this kid. Go find him. He needs some one-on-one. Doesn't matter if it's a rehab. Because another thing in the rehab, they don't train with the group. So it's like, I was going to swim in the end lane. They don't, it's going to be on your own. But the coach could be making that worse. Mm-hmm. And then the coach has to work with the people that are fit and healthy. So then what I try and do is, just take the time, maybe get someone injured in late, work one-to-one with them, be very specific with some of the assistant coaches, give that injured athlete really good defined goals. But we have a process around the athlete anyway. The athlete doesn't really know, but we know what's going on. The psychologist helps me out, gives me heads up. And that can help the whole, because if you get the psychology right, the rehab will go well. You get the psychology wrong, the rehab, the athlete could even have a career-ending experience.
Yeah. So it sounds like efforts are made to kind of keep the athlete involved or incorporated within the training unit, and also these opportunities for them to talk. And earlier you mentioned just that idea of just listening, like not needing to fill the space or offer advice, but just listening to them, finding out where they're at, what's going through their mind. That in and of itself sounds like that there's value. And certainly, there's of course research that definitely highlights the role of social support, and in particular listening support. Are there other kind of forms of involvement or support that you feel are beneficial as a coach for the injured athlete?
It's the whole team, the support team. And you also, I use my team captains a little bit. So in every team, there's a few athletes that you really trust, and they're your team captains, and you do use them to good effect in this example. Like, you do know if someone's having a rough time of it through injury, so you always bring up, you need to find something to do with these guys. Let's try and, if it's a dinner, or if you make sure that this person is still coming to. One thing is, like I said earlier, injury, you just become a bit of a recluse, and you don't socially interact, but you use your team captains to force those people, right? We are going for a coffee. We're going out for dinner. We're going to have a team there. You will come. Yeah. And they might not want to, but as long as you can use your assets around you to force the issue, and it does help. Yeah. It does help.
Right. And also, and just thinking about your own experience, where you were almost given an emotional challenge, I guess, where the coach kind of confronted you in a way to kind of get over your depression. He sort of left you that option of either, you're not of any use to anyone here, sort of just wallowing in your sorrow, so to speak, but either, stay and help or go. And it was kind of like that stark option, I guess. And maybe that requires delicacy or sort of thinking. You said that some athletes can, of course, there are individual differences, but it sounds like maybe that's appropriate at times.
Yeah, you got to know who you're talking to. Like I said about knowing the athlete, knowing who they are, who they grow up with. For a hard guy that's quite driven. You also get guys that are emotionally driven. You'd never use that option of an emotionally driven person, because it's going to end in disaster. It's going to end in some sort of confrontation. If you've got a logical driven person, then they can process it, that sort of challenge. But you got to know who you are. Like, I have guys on my team, I could easily say that thing, like, you either stay or you just go on. You're no good, and that'd be well received. But if I said that to someone else, that could be perceived as bullying or victimizing the athlete. So what I tend to do is, you really got to know who you're dealing with, and that tends to be one of the last resorts as well. Like, it's when you've explored every other option to try and get this person back in, and if they're just not doing it, there has to be that hard conversation. But I always do that now, would always be with the sports psych. And then what you find, the sports psych is very good at, what James is trying to say, or there's definitely ways of saying things. And again, for your own sort of safety as a head coach, you need that support. You need any hard conversations you need to be having with other people around you. And also, if it's a hard one, the athlete probably needs someone with them as well.
Yeah. So I guess kind of my take home would be, proceed with caution when you're using these challenges, but also it's not just what you're saying, but how you deliver the message. And, it sounds like you allude to the sports psychologist who said maybe can soften the delivery of a message, or what could be construed as something confrontational then becomes, oh, okay, I see how, my behavior or, my negative mindset is having a negative impact on myself or others. Maybe you can talk about, are there specific strategies? And again, this is, of course, I know in your role as a coach, that maybe athletes can use to manage negative thoughts or emotions that they have?
I'd say don't hide away from them. So that's again another thing. Like, it's okay, right? If you're injured and you're missing, this is another thing about sport. Sportsmen are told you have to be motivated and you have to feel great 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. And if you're not, you're negative and you're down. It doesn't work like that. A normal human being, motivation is an emotion. Emotions change as we go. So, like around the athlete, what I try and do to them is that if they are feeling negative, speak to me. The worst thing is, someone comes in the morning, if it's an injured athlete, it could be any athlete, say if they're fully functioning, they've got a face like they've woken up on the wrong side of the bed. It's just the atmosphere in the group is bad because this one person is off. I always encourage the athlete, if you've had a rough night's sleep or you've got some problems, just speak to me. And again, it comes down to this whole communication thing. Like all I see is an athlete being a problem and being negative, and the athlete's looking at me thinking, why is he getting at me? I've had an awful night's sleep. I've had some terrible news at home. My girlfriend's dumped me or whatever, and he's being an idiot. He's getting on my case. And again, that's where the conflict arises, because no one's talking. So again, I encourage my guys, like, if there's a problem at home, if there's an issue, you haven't slept well, or someone might just wake up dead and need a morning off, or whatever. Just communicate that, because I trust you. It's very different for junior sports. You can't do that because you don't know the athlete well enough, and they don't know themselves well enough. Yeah. But the professional side, my guys, they're not going to take a day off because they want to win the Olympics. So if they're going to want a morning off, it's because of something's wrong. Yeah. So I encourage that communication. And then, I don't like the negative side. Normally, one of my biggest hates is the athlete when they pull themselves down. That's my biggest hate. I'm not good enough. I don't deserve this. I'm not performing well enough. What I'm seeing is someone great and swimming amazing who can win the Olympics or win in the ISL, but they're talking themselves out of it. That gets me going. I struggle to control that. But say back to the injury, back to the task of today, the injury side, if there is negativity, I encourage them to talk about it, but I don't punish someone for it. I'd say, thanks for being open. Yeah. So, because then you're more likely to turn them around quicker. Right. And because it's all right to be negative. If you've trained all season for the ISL and you can't do the final, and all your teammates are going and you're not, of course you're gonna be pissed off. Yeah. And what my psychologist worked with me, he said to me, I said to him, I'm not motivated. When I was having my injury, I said, I'm not motivated, I don't want to do it. He's like, oh, that's okay. That's all right. So what you're telling me is you're a normal person. And he's like, you've had some bad news. You've got a thing that takes you from the thing you love, and you don't feel great about yourself. And he's like, well, who would? Really? And I was like, oh, yeah, you're kind of right. And he's like, well, why should you feel good about yourself right now? Yeah. And he's like, your mum and dad, they go to work in offices or something like that. One day they wake up and they go, I don't want to work today. Does everyone just go to them and go, oh, you're being negative? It's like, you're being negative. You're a drain on the team. No one wants to be around you. Everyone's like, oh, right, you don't want to go, wow, normal. Because we all go through phases in our lives where these periods, we're reactive to what happens externally. And if something bad happens, it's normal. You don't want to go to work. So why is an athlete different? Yeah. So, and that's what my psychologist explained to me. I'm like, okay, well, so congratulations, James, you're normal. And you think normally.
So, yeah, kind of legitimizing the fact that you are going to feel frustrated. You are going to have bad days. You are going to, feel unhappy or unsatisfied if you miss out on an important competition. Would you say, that you notice more negative thoughts or emotions once the athlete is hurt?
Yeah, it's more frustration, isn't it? You just tapped on it there. It's negative. You can say everything is negative, but it's frustration. There you go. I'd say I'm going to change my vocabulary a little bit on this. You get a lot of frustration, and it's more of and you, as a coach, you have to show that empathy towards the athlete. If they've had their dreams taken away from them, you have to be empathetic, and if you're not, then you run the risk of pushing them down further. Yeah. And an acknowledgement of, you will be frustrated. This will push you, and we may at times, you may at times be very negative. And if you don't communicate that with me, we will probably fall out because I won't understand. But you have to help me to understand how you're feeling, and then I can work with you even better, and we can fix this.
Right. Earlier, you mentioned this idea of that motivation is an emotion. Yeah. You can expand on what you mean by that.
Well, it's an emotion. It goes in cycles. It's impossible to be always super high. So what you find is a lot of athletes, they'll go through a period where they're so motivated, but they'll be at like 150%. They'll be the best guy in the group for about 4 weeks, and then they'll be the worst for 2 months because they're just completely burnt out. So what I try and manage the emotional fatigue on the athletes. So a lot of athletes get to the Olympics or ISL and they've killed themselves all year because they think that's what but they get to the meet and they've got nothing to give because they're emotionally just drained because they've given it all in the training pool. So what we tend to do is we build our emotion through the year, our engagement. So we don't ask, so it's almost like we don't ask them to be full on all the time, more functioning, always feeling you've got a little bit more to give. Always feel that you can go, some days we ask you to empty your tanks, but most of the time, I'd say nine times out of 10 in the week, it's more you've got to feel like you can keep going. You've got to feel like you've got more to give tomorrow or the next session. And that way it just prevents this absolute burnout. And you do find it, so I say it's motivation is emotion because it goes up and down, up and down. Yeah. You'll get periods where even the best athlete just doesn't want to be training. But if you push that athlete too hard during those periods, it makes it worse. Right. So what you need to do is pull that athlete up. And if it is not, okay, take 3 days off, or maybe we'll train once a day in this period. But if you say you've got it, and you make it worse, keep going 10 sessions a week, 4 weights, keep going, and you get to the beige zone. Once you're in the beige zone, you're not getting better, you're not getting worse. The body's there, the brain's not. You're just in the beige area, and then when you get to the Olympics or Worlds or ISL, you just get beige performance.
Right. So that idea of feeling like they have more to give or a little bit more in the tank, is that important or relevant in some way, I guess, in terms of injury recovery? You mentioned sort of that athletes often want to do too much too soon.
Yeah, absolutely. And if you go into the max every session, it doesn't work. If you go to the max every single workout, the body breaks. And injury is generally a way of the body telling you that it's done too much. This is what it is. It's exactly what it is. You've done too much. Right. Because, or you haven't prepared well enough to get for your body to be at that point.
Yeah. You mentioned expectations at the start of our conversation and the fact that you have high expectations. So people are clear that sounds like the goal for them, and I guess for you, is not only to perform at the highest level, but to win at the highest level. Mm-hmm. And I'm wondering what expectations athletes have in terms of their injury recovery.
Honestly, they expect it to be fixed within a few days. That's the expectation. And I guess, that's partly, if you're setting a high performance program or a program of high expectation, it kind of goes all ways. So you want results all the time. So you expect to be fixed straight away. So when I think, again, you have to use the professionals to really set the expectations to the athletes. Say, it's going to take you 6 weeks. It's going to take you this long, and be clear with that, because this is the process. So the athlete will expect to get fixed as quickly as possible. Like I just had a guy who's had 2 surgeries done 6 weeks ago. The doctor said he'll be good. He'll be good in 6 weeks. And then the guy's calling me 3 days later saying, I can train, I can swim. I was like, no, you're not. But now this is what we've got. This is the rehab plan. You stick to this. If you want to go and do swimming and that, the danger is that you're going to get the scar or the stitches infected. And then what could happen is we could go back another 10 weeks. So we could be staring at a 16-week rehabilitation phase. So what we tend to do is give that expectation from the professional to the athlete and say, we are sticking to this. It's also my responsibility as the head coach. Yeah. So if we as a team accelerate the athlete can get to week 5 of the rehab and then the injury go again because we've accelerated it. And that's my fault. I might have nothing to do with the actual work that's going on, right, but that's my fault because I manage the process. Right. So that's why I always have the expectations set by a professional.
Right. And so, but what about in instances where the athlete maybe does seem to be healing well or having an effective recovery? Are the sort of those time expectations adjusted accordingly, or is it always sort of more cautious, I guess, in the approach?
Always always slightly cautious. But if the athlete, with most injuries, the physios set targets to do. So if an athlete is clearly above those target levels, let's say level 3, level 4, level 5, level 6, if we're clearly in front, then you can progress to the next level. Or it's like once the athlete has achieved, if you've got ankle injury, balance on the board for 20 seconds, you can move on. So as long as there's been clearly defined objectives and they've been achieved, you can move on. But if you haven't, then no. And that could even mean you spend more time on the level. It works both ways.
Right. So the time is kind of moderated by the criteria or meeting objective standards of performance, or
It is, but I still stick to I honestly, I'm very cautious. So if a doctor has told me it's 6 weeks, I won't rush them getting back into training. It's not a matter of if you had surgery and you're told to train, have 3 weeks off, and the athlete's trying to get back in after a week. There's no way I'll do that.
Right.
You take your 3 weeks. As soon as you have surgery, you are no longer an athlete. You're a human being.
Yeah.
And the body repairs itself. And I always take, like I said, you go with the professionals.
Right. So it takes time for the body to heal, regardless of whether you're an athlete or you're a person.
Absolutely.
Yeah. And so just a few other questions, James. Well, in terms of the return to sport, how are decisions made about whether the athlete is ready to resume competitive activity?
It comes on just with how, if it's a surgery, is how like the scars have healed. If it's more of like a muscle tear or a ligament damage or shoulder damage, it's what load they can normally handle on dry land first. There's an element of testing, and again, it's like it's slow build. It's more of the team communication around. We will build slowly. What is the plan? Okay, once they can hold a good plank or whatever post surgery, they can move into the water for 10-15 minutes. Then they can maybe the next 3 days of that, then they can swim for 20 minutes, 30 minutes, and 2-3 days of that. It's that slow build. Very, very slow.
What about, though, if that slow build happens at a time when, let's say, they're right on the cusp of getting to the Olympics? How are those two considerations managed?
That's when you have to really look at what's realistic. If you could potentially do it, if you need to take sort of some injections, pain numbing injections, if it's a cusp and it's something like the Olympics or an ISL final, always a discussion is with the athlete. And these are the risks, these are the dangers. If we push you here, we can probably do this, and it's a 50-50 shot, we'll get away with it. But it's your decision. I'm not gonna be part of this. And you've got to sign waivers, because you have to make the athlete aware that if they push themselves too much, they could have career-threatening injury problems.
Right.
And it's always a hard one. That they are the worst. They're the worst. And my first duty of care as a coach is the athlete's health and well-being. We do very robust medical checks every year on everyone. And at that point of view, if it's the Olympic final or if it's the Olympics, and that's their whole life, it has to be. It's up to them. Yeah. It's up to the athlete. And my job is I have to make them aware of possible consequences.
Right.
But it's such a hard one. Yeah. It's such a hard one.
Maybe this is a hard question to answer in generalities, but would you say the athlete's desire to return or compete can cloud their judgment about whether they should or whether they're actually ready to?
100%. 100%, because the athlete, that's your goal. And me as an athlete, I wanted it. You want it. If someone said to me, take the injection and you got a chance to go to the Olympics, you take that injection. And it does cloud your judgment. You don't have a judgment because you're only wired in one way. You're told that the Olympics or the ISL is the only thing that matter. So therefore, you'll do whatever it takes. And that's why you see a lot of, it's a bit more cloudy, even in elite professional like baseball, soccer, American football, where you're paid by a franchise. So, but then it always comes down to the athlete, because they'll realize why they're not playing, they're not being paid, and then they might not get their contract renewed. You know, if they don't take that pain-killing injection or whatever. They know the risk, but they're driven to do it, and there might be more pressure from the franchise owners or whatever. I'm not really involved in that level. But what I would do is more, these are the risks, but you're making this decision on your own. I'm not giving you any guidance on what's right or wrong here, because that's your choice. But if you choose to take the injection or whatever, or the surgery, and we have to rush it through, I'll help devise a plan, but it's got to be you who asks me to do that.
Right. You mentioned at the start that injury, and we've talked about this, that injury is very much a psychological experience. How do you know, or I guess in terms of gauging the readiness, is there some element or component of it looking at the psychological aspect to their readiness to resume activity or to compete?
Yeah, no, absolutely. And so you work with a psychologist. They know, like I say, they can tell if an athlete is anxious about getting back into competition. But again, it's all just talking regularly. How do you feel about getting back into competition? Do you want to? Some athletes, they only train to race. So with a few of them, you can pick them out. You say to them, how do you feel about race? I love it, want to do it, can't wait. I don't care. I don't care if I'm not 100%. I just want to go race. I'm not ready, but I don't care. I don't care about the result. Or you've got others that are fixated on the outcome, and they've got to be in pretty good shape. Otherwise, you're going to have a disaster. They'll go to a meet, they won't swim well, and they won't be able to process why they haven't swum well, and all they'll see is the result, and they'll just be issues because it's not very good. So you adjust that individually for each athlete. You don't put someone in a difficult position that is very outcome driven, especially if they haven't had a good preparation.
So if they're very outcome driven and it's clear that they may not get the outcome they want, better to try and not put them in that circumstance. Is that right?
Yeah, absolutely. Like you get some athletes that are all about the process. Like we had all this buzzword 4 or 5 years ago. It's all about the process this, process that. But some athletes are just not wired like that. They just want to. I haven't won, so I'm in the mood. Or so I do believe in process driven. I do fundamentally that. I do believe that. But it doesn't match everyone's personality.
Sure.
And if you've got someone in your group that they go to meet, they haven't swum very well, and you're like, well, how was your process? And they go, I'll tell you what you can do if you process. And but it's true. It's about knowing the individual and how they work. Some people just, process driven. I love it. I drive on it. I thrive on it. I hit my process. I got my start. I execute my breakout.
Right.
And then someone else is.
They may be saying, well, the process obviously wasn't very good because clearly the results stunk.
The process was, the time was horrible.
Well, and I guess that sort of goes back to your earlier point about, the environment, right? And also whether there's a match between the mindset of the athlete and what you're creating as a coach. And if it's like, if there's too much inconsistency between the two, maybe that's not helpful for that particular athlete. But maybe just one or two other questions for you, James. Your insights are wonderful and much appreciated. I know athletes will certainly benefit from our discussion. Would you say, speaking of benefits, would you say there are any benefits to an injury?
Some. You know what? Some people have been injured and then they have their best ever results because they've been working too hard. I had a girl 2 years ago. She just missed the world record in her main event, and she had a horrible cycle with shoulder problems. And obviously, we log everything now. You look back at it, you look at the cycle, like say you have this lovely plan that you've got, and lovely curves, and you look at this curve, and you're like, she's been playing darts and trying to dot the dot, and it's the worst cycle I've ever seen. And the girl just missed the world record by a tenth at almost 30 years old. and you're like, well, there's got to be something valuable in there, isn't it? And it comes down, maybe we're doing too much. Maybe this constant state of the beige area that she was in quite a lot is just not helpful. Maybe this little break that she had brought her training load down, her recovery went up, the speed went up because she was less fatigued, and we had an absolutely fantastic result. So, and then now, you know, you use it as a coach. You always use those examples. How did this happen to this person? She did this after an injury. It was amazing. And you manipulate the words, don't you, to try and look at the best case in every situation. But it was true. Yeah. You know, it helped to take the foot off the gas. And you know, like this quarantine period, I think will really help older athletes. I think a lot of older athletes will perform very well next year in Tokyo, because they've had this forced break. You have to take your foot off the gas. Also, they have experience, so that they can psychologically deal with, you know, this is a situation, just is what it is, nothing I can do about it. Or if it's your first Olympics or you're young, you're like, I can't train. Like I said earlier, this whole perception of more is better in swimming. I can't train, I can't do it, I'm a failure. I know, what am I supposed to do? So, but the older athletes won't stress, they won't panic because they're experienced.
Yeah, so there can be, certainly, if the injury provides an opportunity for further recovery, that can, you've seen instances where that elicits higher performance than might otherwise be the case.
Many, not one, many.
Many, yeah.
Many.
And I guess that sort of goes back or speaks to the point about, just as a coach, I suppose, considering that training recovery balance, right? And maybe, you know, inserting more of the latter sounds like that at times it may be optimal, yeah, that was a reflection.
It forces a coach to think outside the box. So say if I have a swimmer that's got a knee injury, they can't kick, so they've got to do a lot of pull work, and you've got to do different exercises, and actually realize that you haven't done any of this type of work before, but then suddenly they really benefit from it. Or the athlete's got a shoulder problem, so you're doing a lot of kick. So I've had athletes as well that you do a lot of kick work with them because they can't do work on their shoulders. They come back, the kick is, they're one of some of the best kickers in the world, and they drop their time because the arm strength comes back.
Just a couple of things here. Would you say that there are factors that distinguish the athletes who are successful in their recovery from injury versus those who maybe take a more of a downward trajectory? Either they don't recover, or maybe they do, but at a compromised level?
Yeah, very simple. It's the ones that can get their head around what it actually takes for the rehabilitation and take ownership of their rehabilitation. The ones that constantly come in, just go through the motions with the trainers and the physiotherapists, do the bare minimum, or they're the ones that have the very slow sort of rehab period. The ones that research it, eat well, because diet helps as well. Wow, you know, eat clean. A lot of people, when they're injured, put on weight. That amplifies the problem. You know, eat clean, take ownership of your recovery. But that comes honestly from a team around explaining properly. If the athlete does not have a team that, I say, cares around, like if they just go out, you're injured, off you go, it doesn't work. It has to be a big team effort to bring that athlete back.
Right. So when you have that team environment in which the athlete knows that they're cared about, or that they have, you know, that support around them, then the athlete is more likely to take ownership and hence have an effective recovery. Is that?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. But then again, it does really depend who that athlete is. Like some people just, you know, that's the way they're built. They don't want to do that. As long as you, as a coach or whatever, you explain that you need to take ownership. We appreciate that you might not do it. Because you just know with some people, you say you need to go home, you need 30-minute stretch, and you can pick who's going to do it and who's not. You just know,
right?
You know, but as long as you've done your bit and say you're going to explain that this will aid your recovery. And like I said, I think everything's a fit. You said earlier about like myself and my coach and my athletes. Honestly, I believe it's fit. Like some people hate me, and they can't work with me because I'm more art-based. I don't give the numbers, the data, the statistics. And there's athletes say more of I call them the blue personality from the insights test, is that they need data and numbers. If they don't see data and numbers, they can't buy into a program. I'm not your coach.
Yeah.
You know, and I've seen great athletes not being able to work with great coaches. And I've seen, and it's about the athlete finding the fit with the coach.
Right.
And it's not the other way around. It's not the coach fitting the athlete. It's the athlete. The athlete actually thinking, can I work with this person? If I get injured, is this person going to manage my recovery better than anyone else?
Right.
And it's just that fit. And I've had athletes that come to me that we just don't work. Can't see the world the same. Doesn't mean that they're a bad swimmer or I'm a bad coach. It just means that we're not right for each other. But I also have staff. My staff that work with me are very, very different to me. Very different. And we've got a very big mix of people in our team. And so, but what I try and do is make sure that at least one of the members of the staff can fit, or one of the coaches can fit with every different type of athlete.
Yeah. It sounds like, you maximize the chances of fit with surrounding yourself, I guess, with different sort of perspectives or approaches. Just my last question for you, James, is if you could share a piece of advice for injured athletes, what would it be?
I'd say, honestly, try to relax as much as possible and communicate with the people around you that are managing your recovery. But be open with how you feel. There's nothing wrong with asking for help. As a coach or anyone, it's their job to look after you and help you through. And if anyone asks anyone for help, they're obliged to give it. But be open and honest. It doesn't matter where you're at. If you're struggling psychologically, if you can't play in a game and that's actually making you feel bad, speak to the coach, but do it in the right environment. The best way is always at the end of practice, or can we grab 5 minutes for a coffee? Yeah. Or can we take 10 minutes of your time and just be open and honest? Because that's, psychological impact is the most important. Have good psychological well-being around injury recovery it's so important, and there's clear results. So people that are in a good frame of mind will recover quicker.
Yeah. Thank you so much for all those insights and just invaluable experience that you've shared. I very much appreciate your time today.
Okay, thanks, Leslie. Again, sorry for the Peaky Blinders hat. This is the reality of lockdown.
Again, love the hat. Thanks again.